Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is May 29th. On this day in 2020, amidst nationwide protests against police brutality, a federal security officer was fatally shot in Oakland, California. The assailant exploited the chaos of the demonstrations to carry out a targeted attack against law enforcement. This incident marked the beginning of a series of violent acts linked to the anti-government Boogaloo movement, culminating in the death of a sheriff's deputy in Santa Cruz County a week later. Today, we'll explore the events surrounding the attacks, the ideology that motivated them, and the subsequent legal proceedings. Let's get started. The final days of May 2020 were charged with emotion and protest as the country reeled from the murder of George Floyd. Millions poured into the streets demanding racial justice and police accountability. While most demonstrations were peaceful, the atmosphere was tense and isolated incidents of violence did occur. Amid the chaos, extremist groups like the Boogaloo movement saw an opportunity to exploit the unrest. The Boogaloo movement is a loosely connected anti-government extremist network that was rooted in online spaces. It thrives in encrypted forums, memes, and coded language. What began as a niche internet subculture metastasized into a dangerous ideology, which is obsessed with sparking a second American Civil War. Members signal their affiliation through absurd but chilling symbols. Hawaiian shirts paired with tactical gear mixed with calls for violence against law enforcement and the federal government. One man who was drawn into this ideology was Stephen Carrillo, a 32-year-old Air Force staff sergeant. Outwardly, Carrillo seemed like a disciplined, accomplished serviceman. He had served since 2009 and was part of the elite Phoenix Ravens unit, which was tasked with high-threat security for military assets. But beneath the surface, Carrillo was spiraling. He was disillusioned with the government. He was angry and was increasingly becoming radicalized. His social media footprint revealed his alignment with Boogaloo content, and private messages and public posts hinted at violent intentions. One post, which he made just days before the attack in Oakland, read ominously, quote, "Use their anger to fuel our fire," end quote. Carrillo wasn't operating alone. He connected online with Robert Alvin Justice Jr., a fellow Californian who shared anti-government views. While Justice's radicalization was less overt than Carrillo's, their bond was solidified through the resentment of law enforcement. As the protests against George Floyd's murder erupted nationwide, they saw their moment. On the evening of May 29, 2020, Oakland's downtown was filled with protesters. Thousands had gathered to demand change, but in the shadows, Carrillo and Justice were planning a deadly ambush. They arrived near the Ronald V. Dellums Federal Building in a white van. Inside, Carrillo had prepared an AR-15 style rifle modified with a homemade silencer and tactical setup that was aimed at causing maximum damage and minimal detection. His preparation suggested that he had spent weeks planning for this. Around 9:44 p.m., Federal Protective Service officers Dave Patrick Underwood and his partner were stationed near a security checkpoint. Carrillo slid open the van's side door, raised his rifle, and unleashed a volley of 19 rounds. Officer Underwood was killed instantly. His partner was critically wounded but survived. In the chaotic scene, many witnesses were unsure whether the gunfire was tied to protests or if it was an unrelated incident. Carrillo and Justice used the confusion to their advantage and sped away. When investigators arrived, they quickly pieced together clues. They had surveillance footage, forensic evidence, and Carrillo's online postings. His chilling message earlier that day, encouraging supporters to, quote, "go to the riots and support our own cause," revealed intent to exploit the protests for extremist violence. though it did take about a week for the investigation to zero in on Carrillo. Authorities were able to track that white van to his home in Ben Lomond, a remote area in Santa Cruz County. On the morning of June 6, 2020, sheriff's deputies responded to a report of a suspicious vehicle near Carrillo's residence on Waldberg Road. Deputies Damon Gutzwiller, Eric Lane, and a third officer approached cautiously, unaware that Carrillo was lying in wait. He ambushed them with gunfire from a high-powered rifle, the same one he used in the Oakland attack. Homemade pipe bombs filled with shrapnel added to the chaos. Sergeant Damon Gutzwiller was fatally shot. Another deputy was wounded, and a California Highway Patrol officer responding as backup was injured by one of Carrillo's explosives. Carrillo fled on foot, hijacking a white Toyota Camry from a passerby. Before speeding off, he scrawled Boogaloo slogans in his own blood on the hood, including the words, "Boog" and "I became unreasonable." Thanks to the quick thinking of civilians and backup officers, Carrillo was apprehended. His home revealed a disturbing cache. He had weapons, explosives, and evidence of plans for future attacks. This was not a random act of violence. It was calculated domestic terrorism driven by extremist ideology. The legal fallout from this was swift and decisive. Carrillo faced both federal and state charges. For the Oakland attack, federal prosecutors charged him with first-degree murder and attempted murder. In February 2022, Carrillo pleaded guilty. U.S. District Judge Yvonne Gonzalez-Rogers sentenced him to 41 years in federal prison without parole. On the state level, Carrillo was charged in Santa Cruz County for the murder of Sergeant Gutzwiller, and murder of other officers, and the use of explosives. In June 2022, he pleaded guilty to these charges as well. On August 26th of that year, he was sentenced to life without parole. Carrillo's accomplice, Robert Justice Jr., was also prosecuted. Despite claiming he was coerced, evidence revealed his complicity. In March 2024, Justice was convicted of aiding and abetting first-degree murder and attempted murder. He received a life sentence. The Boogaloo Murders of May and June 2020 left lasting scars. Sergeant Damon Gutzwiller was remembered as a dedicated deputy, a husband, and a soon-to-be father. His funeral drew hundreds of mourners who spoke of his kindness and his unwavering commitment to the job. Dave Patrick Underwood's sister, Angela Underwood Jacobs, became an outspoken advocate. She described her brother as a kind and selfless man who dedicated his life to protecting others. Angela filed a lawsuit against Facebook, arguing that its algorithms had amplified extremist content, which enabled Carrillo's radicalization and facilitated his deadly connections. In response to these attacks, social media platforms scrambled to purge Boogaloo-related groups and content. However, critics argued that these actions were too little, too late. And conversations continue about domestic extremism and the responsibility of tech platforms in curbing online radicalization. Unlike traditional terror groups, the Boogaloo movement's informal structure and use of memes and coded language make detection and intervention difficult. Law enforcement still faces the challenge of distinguishing protected speech from credible threats, which is an increasingly complex task in the digital age. The legacies of Officer Underwood and Sergeant Gutzwiller live on through memorials, scholarships, and community events in their honor. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found today's story compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. It'll help us grow. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!